You're listening to Conflict Radio on the Conflict Radio Network. Greetings and welcome to Conflict Radio. Today is October 29th, 2020, and today we've got Jared Murphy joining us. Jared, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, so thanks for everyone listening and having me on.
We're going to have Michael Cremo on the show today. Jared has a few questions to ask him because basically a follow-up to the interview we had earlier on in the podcast. So I think I'm just going to sit back and relax and let you have at it, Jared. What do you think about that?
Well, I will take that challenge and hopefully make it completely entertaining for you.
Okay, so I'm just going to sit back and listen. We're going to go ahead and get right to it. Michael Cremo, he's the author of Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race, Human De-Evolution, The Forbidden Archaeologist, and My Science, My Religion. He has some really good deals on his websites. It's mcremo.com, mcremo, cremo.com. He also has forbiddenarchaeology.com, humandeevolution.com, mysciencemyreligion.com, and forbiddenarchaeologist.com. So we're going to be right back with him in a second. I also just wanted to mention that Jared Murphy finally has his website up. It's called notaliens.com. Is that right, Jared?
Yeah, it's notaliens.com.
All right,
you awesome. Get a signed copy of my book?
Yes, get a signed copy of the book. And we'll be right back on Conflict Radio with, I guess, Jared, you're going to interview Michael Cremo right after this. And welcome back to Conflict Radio. Today we've got Michael Cremo joining us along with my co-host today, Jared Murphy. Michael, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fine here in Los Angeles. I'm grounded, of course. Normally I'd be traveling a lot of different places in this country and around the world for research and speaking engagements, conferences, and things like that. So, but it's given me time to finish up some writing projects that I was aside when I was doing all that traveling.
Are you still on the COVID lockdown there?
It's pretty much still like that. I mean, technically, I suppose there are places I could go in the United States, but doesn't seem to be the right moment for it yet.
Yeah, it's always best to play it safe, I suppose. Jared, how are you doing today?
Well, in typical neurotic Minnesota fashion, it's less than 30 degrees and there's snow on the ground, which is not sometimes unusual for October in Minnesota, but it is unusual because it's been like over a week now that people have made snowmen and snow forts. This is not okay.
You can keep the snowman. It's all yours. So, Michael, we did have you on a couple months ago, and it was a great time. We had a fantastic interview, and then Jared wanted me to reach out and get another interview lined up with you. He has some questions and some follow-up on some things. Jared, it's all yours.
Oh, well, yeah, let's get right into it. So on the travel note, Michael, one of the things I talk about a lot is this barrier between the East and the West in reference to knowledge. And what do you think of just any Russian researcher anybody who has any interest in the subjects that we have right now, whether it's Russian or Chinese, just Asian, where do you think there's this big fall down between names we know, like yours, in this field of research? Is there somebody in Russia that people should be paying attention to?
There is. I have to admit, I would have to really think about it to come up with names, but I have been in touch with researchers from Russia over the years. I've been to Russia maybe four times, and maybe most recently, it's been a few years, but I've been there 4 times. I've spoken at universities from Vladivostok to Moscow to St. Petersburg. And there are alternative researchers in Russia that are, investigating a whole bunch of topics, ranging from the paranormal to alternative archaeology and things of that sort. I would have to go through my notes to come up with some names for you. And I think part of the problem is that English, has become kind of the international lingua franca. You know, like maybe the dollar has become the exchange currency. It's like, so that is a problem, because there are many people in these other countries who are doing good research, but we tend not to hear very much about them because their works aren't available so much in the English language. So I think that is a major problem. And I know I'm a member of several archaeological societies like the World Archeological Congress. And it is a matter of concern that everything now goes through the English language. International scientific conferences, they're usually held in English for the most part. So it's definitely a problem, and I'm not immune from it either.
Right. I mean, it's the standpoint of they have their own ruins that just don't, again, Stonehenge. It's always Stonehenge. And yet okay, well, what about Ukraine? What about those Siberian, even if we're thinking big picture, like the big Siberian Cyclopean 3,000 ton blocks, are they, what's as far as any information in general that's fascinated you, has anything come out of the Eastern Bloc recently or in any time? Maybe those gold nano parts, but
yeah, those were kind of interesting. There was an archaeologist named Mochanov, Mochanov, Mochanov. And he discovered very old stone tools and weapons in Siberia, basically, far eastern part of the Russian Republic. And that's kind of interesting, because it means there were populations there for a long, long time that could have entered North America. Like we have, many people today in the scientific world, the world of archaeology, they think humans only entered North America about 20,000 years ago. But there are other researchers like Virginia Steen McIntyre and others who have done research at places like Huayatlaco in Mexico and found evidence for human presence in the form of stone tools and weapons that go back about 300,000 years. There was a discovery like that in San Diego also. So, the fact that there were beings making similar kinds of stone tools and weapons in the Russian Far East and Siberia, that part, means they could have come over through Alaska, down through North America, ages ago, much longer than 20,000 years.
And then those, for those that don't know, well, and we discussed McIntyre's work the last time, and it's irrefutable there's also that volcano that erupted and covered another site in Mexico, correct?
Yeah, Virginia Steen McIntyre talks about that case too.
Which I find it fascinating because I'm doing research and I'm trying to get ready to publish. I was in the later stages of editing my book, and I go you won't believe it. It's like a movie. I go into an architectural salvage place, and I look down. There's a stack of 7 National Geographics, and I'm like, what are the chances there's the 1922 edition that shows the original archaeological excavation? Because I found it on archive.org. I found it on that internet database, but I'm thinking there's 15 old National Geographics. And yes, I dug through, and the exact copy of that pyramid in Mexico with the lava flow, the original find, the original diagnosis of the age of over 8,000 years. I have that National Geographic from that original visit in 1920. Well, the article publication from 22.
And what was the name of that place? Do you recall it?
What, Cuicuilco?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, you have a 35-mile long, 15-mile wide volcanic lava flow on top of 35 plus feet of dirt, and underneath you have a pyramid. It's difficult to say, okay, well, even if it's early post Younger Dryas, it's still 9,000 years old at a minimum. And then you have McIntyre's career smashed find, and dating that to 300,000 years. And I think you bring up some other scientists. I mean, you enrolled a lot of other people to look at that, and I think I've heard you say it could be even that some of them cited it to be over 500,000 years.
Yes, that's true. Some of the initial investigators that went down there, I mean, it really started in the early 1960s with a Mexican researcher called Juan Armente Camacho. And he was a fossil collector, and he was collecting fossil bones from the area around what's now called the Valsequillo Reservoir. And he found this huge mammoth bone, from its shoulder or something like that, big bone, and it had all kinds of detailed carvings on it. And it was considered to be over 40,000 years old. So it was shown on the cover of Life magazine, and some researchers from England went on an expedition with some Mexican archaeologists to look at the place where this bone was found, and they determined it could be 500,000 years old or even older than that. So that's a fact. And then some American archaeologists came down and took over the site, and there was an archaeologist trained at Harvard University, Cynthia Irwin Williams. She was kind of in charge of the site, and she found stone tools and weapons. She thought, well, this is really great. And she, on the basis of some initial reports, decided it must be about 40,000 years old. And at the time, that would have been quite revolutionary, because most archaeologists in the late 60s and early 1970s, they thought humans had been around less than 20,000 years in North America. So this would have doubled the age. But then, she wanted more detailed studies done. So she brought in a team of geologists to do, including Virginia Steen McIntyre, to do some more dating on the site. And they got ages of between 200,000 and 300,000 years for the places where the artifacts were found. At that point, Cynthia Irwin Williams, who was in charge of the excavation, said, "We can't publish that. That please don't publish that." So they were, because she told the geologist, "You just don't understand. Like if this gets reported in any kind of publication for archaeologists, they will just not accept it. Because as I said, they thought 20,000 years was the most ancient human presence in the Americas, and they didn't think any human-like being existed anywhere in the world at 200,000 or 300,000 years ago that was capable of making these kinds of things, which were fairly advanced. They included projectile points, arrowheads, spearheads, things like that. So it's kind of a really interesting case. They just kind of suppressed it. And then Virginia Steen McIntyre and some of her geologist colleagues, they independently published the age for the site, but it just kind of dropped into oblivion.
Do you think that there's any is there any reason why in parallel to this, why no one touches the Paracas or the actual the physiology of an elongated skull? Because you talk a lot about ancient Australopithecus, all the different alleged forms of human. You covered it really well in Forbidden Archaeology. But when it comes to the Paracas, when you have a spinal column going into a skull completely different than a normal human, the suture lines, the blood work that was found in the 70s to not match, to your point, the land bridge theory and the idea of people being in America and North America and Latin America only because of a land bridge from Siberia. It's ludicrous, but why does no one touch the physiology or the DNA? So it's a two-part question. One is, nobody touches the physiology of the Paracas. It's just literally the giant elephant in the room, along with all this geological evidence for the antiquity of humanity. But then you have zero genetic testing going on, whether it's Egyptian mummies. What is going on? Why? Or do you know of any?
Well, yeah, there have been different cases like that. There was a researcher, Lloyd Pye, for example, who had a very unusual skull with a bulbous kind of head, and he called it Star Child because he privately raised some money from different philanthropists to get some DNA studies done. And when they got the DNA studies, I think they were mitochondrial DNA, which is a kind of DNA that's only passed down through the maternal line. Most of our DNA is a combination of mother and father's DNA, but this mitochondrial DNA, which is found in cells, is passed down only through the mother, through the production of the egg. So when Lloyd got the results, he said, it's not like there's much of the DNA evidence was not like that of terrestrial humans. So that kind of led him to propose it was some kind of a celestial terrestrial hybrid. And, for as far as I'm concerned, well, that should be considered. Why not? But these days, it would be very hard to find anyone in the scientific world, the scientific establishment, that would seriously consider such things.
The bones are literally there, and the Paracas, even as far as standard academia goes, they're dating back 9,000 years, maybe more, and to the very edge of Younger Dryas. But that's just the ones they're finding, right? But
Is that that's Brian Forrester who does
some of that research, but irrelevant to Brian even. It's just when you look at the physiology of the skulls, the spine goes in the back of the head. It doesn't go in the center. The foramen magnum are different. The suture lines are different, even without any DNA testing. The physiology of this human is not the same, and yet they're also found all over Europe, and they're found, pretty much on every continent so far.
Oh, I didn't know that they were found. Maybe I just haven't been following it closely enough, but my impression before had been they'd been confined to South America.
Yeah, they've been found in Egypt. They found in Bulgaria. It still comes back to, okay, so you're a biologist, you're a paleoanthropologist. How do you not address the physiology of these humans? They're not the same. And it's not about it being an alien. It's just simply that of all the different lines of humans that have simultaneously lived, here is another example of an upright walking human that is not. Yet again, it's just they don't want to do the testing, and I just was wondering if you had run into anyone in all the different ways you can bang your head on the wall about why people won't address the house of cards here. It's kind of hard to walk around. You just have to ignore the bodies, the physiology. It drives me nuts.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I'm going to have to look a little deeper into it myself.
See, I was picking at you to find out if, not really picking, but I was hoping that maybe someone on the Russian side would look at it or wouldn't have the same, I don't know. Yeah.
Or prejudice.
Yeah, because it's completely fascinating. And again, it'd be one thing if they were just deformed skulls, but the anatomical nature of the actual, again, going into Halloween, the bones are completely eerie with the way the skull attaches to the spine and these different makeups of the body. It's just different. And they existed simultaneously and on most continents. So what are they doing? Why are they there? But go ahead.
One reason I like coming on shows like this is that I often learn things that I'm unaware of. I'm just one person. I've got a particular focus to my work. I'm open to others who have other perspectives and other focuses for their work. So I think I've learned something today, that it's not just confined to those South American discoveries that Forrester deals with.
No, not at all. I would have to, I guess I could talk to you about it offline, but I know some archaeologists that have found the exact same thing in different continents, and it's direct firsthand accounts. But I think that if it's not just that physiology, and like you said, you have a particular focus, and we all have to share our research, and we all have to work together because we can't all be right all the time, and it's more about collective research. But
Yeah.
what do you think if you had, all right, here's a terrible hypothetical. If you had an unlimited budget, where's the first place you would take an interdisciplinary archaeological team, right down to DNA? What would you look at right now? What's at the top of your pick list?
That's a really good question. I don't often get questions like that.
Yes.
So I may
Conflict
have to
Radio next month with Michael.
Because I've been doing this a long time, and some questions I hear again and again and again, and I've got my little canned routine answers that I give to them. But to have a question like that, if you had an unlimited budget, what would you do with it? That is a really fascinating question, because there's so many things I would like to see resolved,
Yeah, you don't have to pick. Don't pick one. If it's a couple, let's just start with what's at the top of the list.
Well, let me tell you something. Like a few years ago, an archaeologist or anthropologist interested in North American, the peopling of the Americas, got in touch with me, and he said, "I'd like to assist you in some way." And most of what I do is like documentary research. I'm not particularly out in the field looking for things. What I've mainly done is find articles and things like that from archaeology publications going back tens and hundreds of years, and finding the anomalies and then gathering information about them and publicizing them. So, but there's this case. So I told this archaeologist who wanted to do something practical in the field. Well, there's the California gold mine discoveries, that were made in the 19th century, when miners were going to California, digging tunnels into the sides of mountains, and they would find human skeletal remains, stone tools and weapons, obsidian spear points, so many things, in layers of rock that belong to the early part of the geological period called the Eocene, which means they're about 50 million years old. So then I recalled that a philanthropist in England had recently written to me and said, "Do you have any research project going on, that we could possibly help you with funding?" And so I got back to him. I said, "Okay, well, I've got a researcher, an archaeologist, who's willing to go out to a place called Table Mountain near the town of Sonora in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Central California, which is one of the centers of the gold mining area." And he's promised he's going to get in touch with the Bureau of Land Management, which, because it's government property, federal property, and make a request to do research. And then I had gone out there myself once, and I was looking for trying to locate some of the 19th century gold mining tunnels. And I in the process of doing that, I was going to the county land offices and looking at old maps of mines and the properties and taxes and stuff. And I met a man there who worked there, who was an archaeologist who had done consulting for mines, big strip mines, so that they could do their environmental archaeological reporting that they have to do. The companies that are mining, they have to check and see, is there any archaeological sites there, Native American Indian remains, or like that. So I all four of us met in California. The funder, the consultant, the archaeologist, and myself. And we were kind of calculating, okay, what would it take? You would have to be proposing, you can't be proposing that you would be looking for evidence that humans were present millions of years ago in California. You'd have to say, well, we're researching 19th century gold mining techniques, and you want to investigate those old tunnels. So then we were starting to think, okay, what would this project look like? And you'd have to, these old mining tunnels are sometimes, they're full of water, so that would have to be pumped out. And if you're going to go into them and start trying to excavate further in the layers that were known to have yielded human bones and human artifacts in the past, like you would have to, there's so many rules and regulations these days. You'd have to have people shore up the tunnels. If you're going to have people taking large amounts of sediment and rock out of the tunnels, you'd have to truck it out somewhere, dispose of it properly. And so when we started calculating what it would actually cost to do something like that, it kind of ran beyond what the philanthropists would be able to give. So I suppose the first thing I would do with it is see if I could get that project going again.
Well, this is a good start.
Yeah. If had an unlimited budget for doing something in what we could call the alternative archaeology field, I think that's one thing that would be at the top of my list, because it was something I wanted to do. I thought all the pieces seemed to be coming together. The archaeologists willing to do the work to make a formal proposal, recruit other people, the consultant, who had extensive knowledge of the laws and rules and regulations and agencies that would be concerned with any such thing. It's also a local person who could possibly recruit people locally to do the kind of work that needed to be done. And I think it would have been a fantastic project.
That's and I know you go over it extensively in Forbidden Archaeology, and you've probably written on it and spoken on it for other people to get access to via videos. But at the same time, it's one of those, I don't even know if you call it a nail in a coffin of this house of cards of our history. Really, the findings of the layers at 50 million years Well, even in northern Mexico, 300,000 years, it doesn't fit the timetable we're told.
No, it
And
doesn't.
I always look at this, the way that academia goes at this theoretical model of, well, this is how it went. Well, we don't hold on to our cell phones apparently for longer than a year or two, and yet we've held on to 140-year-old theories as if we've had no other new ones. Okay, I don't want to even shift it. I got to ask, what else besides that find? Which I'm pointing out again for everyone to pick up Forbidden Archaeology and look for the detailed work that you did on this, because I think it's an extraordinary find. It's just fact after fact. But what else would you do if you had that support?
I might try to put together some facility, like establish an endowment or whatever to give support, buy a piece of land somewhere, put a building on it, and residential facilities, and just a place where researchers could come who are engaged in these kinds of areas and be supported, perhaps arrange for some publishing or something like that. In other words, have an institute.
Yeah, that would be a huge resource. Dang it, I wish I would have thought of that.
Yeah, library, a place to gather information. Of course, you don't have to have, everything is distributed and digital these days, but still, I think it helps to have a place, not in cyberspace, but in three-dimensional space-time, where people can congregate, have meetings, and things like that.
Yeah, on that mining issue, or on it's Table Mountain, right?
Yeah.
Was there anything that, besides the actual layers of humanity and the tools being found, have you come across anyone that's done research in that mountainous Western American area of any underground caverns, caves, artificially built, possibly in antiquity, caverns?
From time to time, I've heard of such things. I haven't looked deeply into it, but I've heard all kinds of things like that. Like if you're going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas, there are places out in Death Valley and those mountains in Nevada and eastern part of California where you hear about such things.
But yeah, how much time can you spend researching everything that comes across your desk?
Yeah, and like kind of it's really strange. I'm a practitioner of Bhakti yoga. I was a disciple I am a disciple of a guru from India, Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he once spoke about tunnels that ran from southern India to South America. And they said that gold was transported through these tunnels to this ancient kingdom that existed off the coast of southern India. So I've heard that some people have gone and found some of these tunnels in the Andes Mountains, and people that I know, claim to have been there and seen them. They're like huge. They're kind of like, you drop something in them and it just goes.
That's fascinating because
Doesn't
I've
reach.
not heard it. Not in India, but or in the Andes. You're talking about the Andes?
Yeah, because apparently there's a lot of gold. There was at least a lot of gold in South America, and the Incas and other civilizations apparently had a lot of it, and there was apparently some way to transport it. So I have heard about these things. I haven't really dug into it myself in any great detail, but are you aware of any specific cases?
I do. I have one that I've heard about, but I was going to ask you quick about. You remember Buzz Aldrin and Eric von Daniken heading down to South America to try to walk through some of these caves or some of these tunnel systems that they were described as.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever follow up? Not so much with them, but did you ever? Did that get on your radar? Some of these rock cut through the Andes, just the tunnel systems that kind of went between mountain ranges. The machine. They were always described as being machine tunnels, that they weren't chiseled.
I've heard of such things, but I haven't gotten deeply into it. Once I spoke at a conference in the Mount Shasta area in Northern California, and I heard talk about things like that there.
Oh, that's interesting. So just in that area, there's also something underground.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think it's fascinating that you could have a prior pre-Younger Dryas culture that could have been either creating rock-cut shelters, storing supplies underground in case of, or living in locations. And it's just interesting that these are, again, like you said, founding an institution where people could meet and talk, where the start isn't, I don't know how the start of, whether it's paleoanthropology, archaeology, whatever you want to call it, how is it starting with theories and starting with the most factual, non-congruent finds, where it's like this is the center, not the edge of the table of conversation. This is where we have to start and work from, and instead of it being pushed to the edge. Is it just laziness? Why are they doing this?
I mean, I have my own ideas about it. I suppose everybody who's involved in these things has some idea. I tend to think it's because if you start going down this direction, you're going to find things that, as we know, contradict the current dominant theories. And it seems to me the things will start leading towards consciousness and as being primary in the universe, because you begin to think, well, the current ideas are extremely materialistic. We're machines made of matter, we're kind of machines made of molecules, and that's all there is to it. Whereas, and I think this has to do with some decisions that were made in the world of science maybe about 500 or 600 years ago. Because if you go back even in Western Europe a few centuries ago, 400 or 500 years ago, they had a scientific picture of life and the universe that included non-material substances and energies, vital forces. They would study scientifically, alchemy and witchcraft and, so many things that nobody would touch in the world of science today. And so they had a completely different, not completely different, but in many ways, a very different set of metaphysical concepts of what's real. And around that time, some scientists made the decision, well, let's set aside these mystical forces, mystic powers, subtle beings and entities, and let's just focus on ordinary matter and learn how it works on that level, mathematically describable laws and things like that. So they made that decision, and it was very profitable in the sense that by just focusing on ordinary matter operating according to principles that could be repeated with experiments and expressed in terms of mathematical equations. And so they found that by learning these things, they were able to develop a great deal of control over matter, ordinary matter. They were able to make technologies that were very popular with governments. For example, governments always wanted better weapons for their militaries. So these scientists, they were able to do it. And they still do it today. Everybody's looking for, the latest hypersonic missile, the atomic weapons, other kinds of nuclear weapons. And then they were able to make pharmaceuticals, which created a huge industry that's still operating today. And then the governments liked all the economic activity it generated, more tax money coming in from everywhere. And the people like it too. We like the stuff they produce, the computers, the phones, this technology, that technology. So we all kind of bought into it, but at the expense of not having a complete picture of reality. Because, if we ignore the non-material elements that may be there in the human organism and other life forms, these vital energies, consciousness, all of this, then you wind up with a science that's very restricted in what it can do. But the thing is, what it can do, as I said, is deliver technologies and things like that generate power and wealth for certain groups in society. And if things were changed, then the whole system of economic, political, cultural, religious, educational institutions that supports that whole thing, just have people be good producers and consumers of things that can be sold through markets that generate power and wealth for the people who control the system. And if everybody just plays their part, keeps their nose to the grindstone, pays their taxes, buys the stuff, then you've got a perfect system. Unfortunately, by ignoring these other aspects of life, we find it's not perfect. Science can't explain certain fundamental things: the origin of life, the origin of consciousness. We have a political system that's based on competing groups, that always have to be in conflict. And we're destroying the environment, of the planet. So I think that is the reason why they don't want any of these ideas that will ultimately lead, whether we're talking about, archaeological topics like human antiquity or paranormal topics or UFO research. It all leads in the direction that there's something more than molecules involved in our existence and origins. And if people started doing that, they went in this other direction, they would be putting less energy and time into being good producers and consumers of whatever society is producing and wants produced and consumed. And if energy was taken out of that and put into developing consciousness, that would be bad for the whole system. So I think ultimately that's the reason why getting into these other things is discouraged, ultimately.
Doesn't genetic memory, doesn't these little ticks at our consciousness when we're looking at things and there's this everyone's asking the questions. It never goes away. Despite all the entertainment, the distractions, like you said, gray state, one continent to another, all of it aside and the distractions, when we're looking at these archaeological finds, when we're seeing buildings of our past, when people go and take tours and they have experiences that they cannot explain, or they are feeling connected to someone alive or dead, it often it gets shirked off as a paranormal or it was just static electricity. But in reality, there's been more than enough science now when it comes to, I think, genetic memory and also specifically maybe what that human consciousness really is. But in speaking of that, though, do you think in an interdisciplinary look, whether you're archaeologically digging something up or wanting to project some, staying away from wishful thinking, isn't there a role for exactly that genetic memory and that consciousness that we, although ignoring, don't you see it popping up within not only finds, but in what we're seeing in, like, even now?
Yes. For example, many physicists and cosmologists and astrophysicists are coming to accept some kind of panpsychism. That's the idea that matter itself on some fundamental level, whether it's quantum mechanical or what, consciousness has to be, at least this is how they try to solve the problem of consciousness. They've never been able to figure out how you get consciousness from any combination of chemicals, whether it's the DNA molecules or atoms or whatever. Getting consciousness out of it, nobody has really figured that out. So some of them have started going to this panpsychism idea that on some fundamental level, consciousness is a property of matter. It's there right from the beginning. I'm not myself a supporter of this. If you want to say every atom or every subatomic particle or quark or is conscious, then, well, if I consider my brain, It should just be a swarm of little conscious bits. But where does this unified individual focus of consciousness that I identify as myself, persisting for as long as this body exists, how do I explain that? I favor some kind of dualism. In other words, there is a conscious self that exists beyond matter. Personality and individuality and consciousness are all properties of it, and that's what animates the collection of molecules that I call my body. But like I said, I realize different people are going to have different approaches to this, but you're asking mine, and that's it.
No, yeah, that's fabulous, because it's not about historical findings. It's not about proving a point about this is an exact finding, but these experiences or sensations present. Have you had, or have you been around anybody where you've been able to either have you personally experienced something very profound? As much as you want to dig up that mountain, is there something that stands out to you as at least a dividing rod towards this exact point?
Yeah. When I was maybe 20 years old, I was in the United States Navy. This would be around 1970. And I was posted to a weather station, a Navy weather station in Iceland, Keflavik, Iceland. And, I spent almost 2 years there. And it's an amazing place, Iceland. It's up near the Arctic Circle. So in the summertime, it's practically light for 24 hours. And in the wintertime, it's dark 24 hours. It's like amazing place. And there's volcanoes and glaciers. And so I used to go with some of my friends in the Navy. We would go out like camping. We did it once in the winter time. We went out into the mountains. They're not like big, tall mountains like Mount Everest. They're maybe a few thousand feet high. And we camped kind of like in a valley at the foot of some of these snow-covered, ice-covered mountains. And, we decided, I think there were 3-4 of us there. We decided to go race to the top of one of these mountains. It was kind of like really late at night, wintertime, snow, ice, but, no wind or any precipitation, but cold. So we kind of started climbing up this mountain, and I thought, okay, I'm ahead of the other guys. I'm going to make it to the top first. So I was kind of scrambling over rocks and trudging through snowdrifts and ice fields, and going gradually up to the top. When I got almost to the top, I found I slipped, and I started going down the slope on my back with my head pointing down, and I had on a Navy winter parka, Arctic parka. It had a real smooth surface on it, kind of. And I just started going faster and faster lying on my back with my head pointed down the hill. And I was thinking of all the cliffs that I'd climbed by. I was thinking of all the sharp rocks that were, I was going to split my skull open. I was trying to stop. I did everything, trying to dig in my heels or whatever. And at a certain moment, I felt myself, I just let it go. I just realized I'm not going to be able to stop. I'm going to go over a cliff. I'm going to smash my head on a rock. So I just kind of gave up. And I felt myself just going out of my body, and I was looking down. I could see it going down the slope. And then I kind of blacked out. And, I woke up, kind of, one of my friends kind of shaking me, and he said, "You all right?" Yeah. So I'd kind of come down and then landed in a big snowdrift. So they said that we saw you going down. It says the way that you came down was the only way you could have come down and lived. We thought you were gone. So I had a kind of an out-of-body experience, and that's something I've always remembered.
I think it's interesting that it was in the cold, too, because, and I've mentioned that, and I bring it up a lot with people, is that I met Wim Hof and started practicing that cold, the breathing techniques and the cold weather, the showers, the ice cold, ice water baths. I started doing that a couple of years ago, and I try to explain to people it's one thing to take a meditation as an intent or in a traditional practice like yoga. It's another thing to do a breathing technique where you feel with the you don't have to. I know people hate the cold. People try to do it without it, but when you do a breathing technique that you immediately feel present and grounded, and like a light switch goes and you're actually connected. I don't know how to explain it, to everything, to the earth, to you, to us, to how is it that you can go with a conscious effort into a state of being that just seems like a switch. And you made a mental switch note, it seems like, and immediately either turned on or reactivated something that you could always do.
Yeah, I had an experience like that in Russia. Once I went on a lecture tour in Russia. It was in the winter time. So, I spoke at places like Omsk, which is in Siberia, and, and one of the places, my host took me for a Russian sauna in the winter time, and it was like you do the sauna thing, which is pretty intense, and then you go into a winter cold stream, and that is like an out-of-body experience. Like you said, you have to breathe. You better learn how to breathe.
Was there any vodka involved while you were doing that?
No, actually, I've abstained from alcohol for 50 years.
That's impressive. But that I've seen video of Russians, that process, and I've also seen the videos of the little kindergartners running around at 20 below zero in their little diapers and or not, they're preschoolers, so they're like a year and a half to 3 years old. Some of them can barely walk, and they're running around on a Russian recess, and they're all playing in the snow with nothing on, barefoot. The teacher's in a swimsuit, and then they all go back inside for hot tea, and they're starting this from a very young age.
Yeah, another thing you can do is you can lie down in the snow and make snow angels, coming out. Another thing that I experienced there was not going into a river or a cold lake or anything like that, but they have as part of the sauna, you come out and there's a bath, like a big tub, or swimming pool, like a small swimming pool, but it fits inside the building. And you go in there after a couple hours doing the sauna thing. And then when you go in there and you dip yourself in that, it's like, it's almost an out-of-body experience.
How long did you stay in the river? How long were you in the river?
Not too long. It's it was more like a stream because it was flowing. You can dip yourself in maybe a few minutes.
That's still impressive when you're, they tell people you're going to get hypothermia, or you can't do this, or you can't be in the cold, and there's the human body reacting to something that I don't think is just a physical experience. I think it is a conscious experience too, and it's not about withstanding.
No, it definitely is. I didn't think about it like that at the time, but now that you were mentioning it, I realized. So that's what I was feeling.
It's super interesting to try, and then I just think it's also interesting that the other time is here you are sliding down, you're in an Arctic environment again, and again, although you were insulated and you were warm to some degree, the environment.
That was the time when I still was sometimes indulging in alcoholic beverages. I think that's how we got the whole idea of having, at midnight.
Hey guys, I just wanted to break in here for a second. We are at the break point. You guys want to keep going or take a break?
Michael?
I'm fine. We can keep going as far as I'm concerned. But if you guys, either one of you, needs to take a break, go ahead.
I'm good. If you guys are good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. So, should we just start right back now, or do we need like a 3-second silent bumper?
No, just go ahead.
Well, yeah, so you were slightly possibly partaking, which is just enhancing your already existing personality. It's not like it's changing you. Perhaps you were maybe traversing an area in the dark in the Arctic that was probably a terrible idea. But one out-of-body experience later, were you ever able to repeat, maybe not the drinking part, were you able to reach a similar state?
Yes, but some years later, I turned to a technique of meditation. I meditate on the Hare Krishna mantra, and sometimes I have feelings that are probably even more intense than the sliding down the mountain or doing the sauna. And that's when I chant this mantra in some sacred place, where I feel like completely released. There's Haridwar and Rishikesh in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, where the Ganges River comes out of the Himalayas. And for thousands and thousands of years, they've been sacred places, and kind of you can at Rishikesh, you can, they have these chains by the river because the river is flowing really fast, and if you dip yourself in, you get swept away. But they have these chains, metal chains that are hooked up to a post, and you can grab onto one of these chains and just kind of stay in the water and meditate. And it's a amazing feeling.
And that's something anybody could. I mean, are there groups that are led for it, or can you just go? Or
you can go as an individual. I think some people are into different types of yoga. There's yoga ashrams there. There's a society that I belong to, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We have centers in India that I go to when it was possible to go.
Yeah. Is there? Do you feel like there's any in the idea of the mantra, or maybe some people would consider it more of the mystification side of it, but do you think there's any truth to the idea of base frequencies, that brain entrainment? Do you feel like, I'm not trying to reduce it to a mechanical or technical point, but have you experienced a higher state, or that kind of what you're between the mantra and the technique? Do you feel like there's either sounds or music or both, or anything else that has contributed to maybe clicking you past a plateau or putting you into a different spectrum of that same consciousness experience?
Well, there's two ways to vocalize the mantras. One is internally, kind of mentally focus on the subtle sound of it. The other way is it's called kirtan, and that means singing it out loud with traditional musical instruments, which may be drums and cymbals. And I recall one time I was in a place called Mayapur in West Bengal, where for thousands of years they've had, and especially for the past few hundred years, they've had pilgrimages where they visit various sacred sites. And at these sacred sites, they sometimes chant, thousands of people together, these mantras loudly, like singing them. So I was in one such place, and I was in the midst of the chanting. I kind of felt like I was in a spiritual jacuzzi or something, like this huge whirlwind of consciousness. It was like an amazing experience. So, yeah, I've also seen people who have, medical professionals and people like that do studies of people who are meditating, chanting mantras. And there's quite a few studies, just empirical studies, where they measure the effects on a person's consciousness, by doing brain scans and things like that. So, and they've noticed some good effects.
Yeah, I've always thought about that brain entrainment where they've done the studies where if two people, like now we're having a conversation, we can't see each other, we are all over the internet on this, but the idea of either a continued conversation or face to face, that brain entrainment, that the brain waves of each individual actually start to beat simultaneously, like a heartbeat, they start to beat together, they start to entrain the same rhythm, the same tempo. And
Yeah.
then I'm wondering, does this tie into it all the Sufis of the Middle East? Is this the Sufis, the idea of group dreaming, the idea of 30 Sufis not consciously?
Twirling.
Yeah, is that? Have you experienced any of that, or do you think that's what did you? Does that tie into any of it? The the Eastern philosophies that you're practicing or that you've seen?
Yeah, yeah, there are commonalities across cultures. So yes, if you have the idea, I mean, I guess the classic image of the Sufis is a lot of them in their traditional dress, twirling and spinning, and to what I would call, they may call it prayer, or but to me it's mantras, it's sound vibration. So uh, yeah, I think if you look at all cultures, music and sound vibration is usually connected with some kind of, I don't want to call it this, but I can't think of a better word at the moment, some ritual or practice that has some purpose to connect one with some higher or invisible reality. So whether it's Native American Indian or Australian Aboriginal or ancient Greek drama and song, or different Eastern practices of uh, meditation on mantras or chanting of mantras as a community or group. Uh, yeah, I think there are parallels that can be made, cross-cultural parallels that can be made, and even I mean, just from the standpoint of popular Western culture, I think it's why people like getting together at a football game or a concert, a rock concert or something. They like to let loose, dance, jump, yell, sing. It's like, I think it's something that spread throughout humanity, as far as I can see.
I totally agree. It's not, it's, I think that this just came up with me the other day about that exact same point about it's not the event itself, it's the gathering of the people all joining together that is making the connections. It's that consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not the object it's directed on, it's the group activity of it that is creating the connection.
Yes. Of course, anything can be misused.
Which,
You can use that group sensation, say, hey, aren't we all having fun? Or you can use it, hey, let's get excited and go get the other tribe and take what they've got.
And before you know it, we can account for the last couple world wars. Yay!
Yeah, so they're powerful technologies, just like the internet. It's a very powerful technology. It brings, I mean, that again is another, community sharing ideas and this and that. But it's also an opportunity for somebody to misuse it in some way. And, I suppose we all have our individual opinions about these things, but I think the general principle is something we would all say, that these technologies or practices or customs or whatever we want to call them, they can be used for things that are good and also for things that are not so good.
Do you think that there should be any updating to there's something I think important and powerful about the traditions of it, but in your experience of even the time that you've practiced, do you feel like again, somebody like Stig Severinsen and Wim Hof, they come along, they set world records, they show everyone they can consciously control their immune system and inflammatory response, and that this is old tech, that this is a genetic ability that we've had for maybe millions of years, or was developed again by a more advanced human society in the past, and we're just kicking through here in safe mode, conscious mode. Isn't there does anything come across your mind or what you've seen just about trying not just a new technique, but taking it from just the mystified tradition of it into, I'm not saying mechanical, but is there anything you're seeing that could contribute to that ascension to consciousness?
Yes. I kind of like the work of Rupert Sheldrake in some ways. He's done these very simple experiments that anyone can do that tend to demonstrate, the reality of consciousness and the ability of consciousness to influence other conscious entities at a distance. You could call it extrasensory perception if you want. So I would say that a lot of our technology today is our kind of dumbed down attempt to reproduce abilities that people in past societies, or maybe even in some places even today, abilities that they naturally had. And one of these abilities might be the ability to hear and see things that are going on at a distance. So I was once at a conference, and Rupert Sheldrake was there, and I was there, and we both went to a workshop that was being given by Stefan Schwartz, who was a remote viewing person connected, I think, originally with Stanford Research Institute, that did some work for the government in these things, remote viewing. So his position was that this is something that everybody has as a natural ability, but we just don't understand it or use it. So I went to Rupert Sheldrake's lecture too, and we had, he did a demonstration. There were about 100 of us in that workshop, and he divided us into 50 pairs. And the idea he was trying to get across is, have you ever felt that somebody was staring at the back of your head? You turn, look, somebody's staring. And is that sensation that you have, is that a real sensation, or is it just chance that you just happened to turn around and somebody was there? And if you did it 100 times, you'd find 50 times somebody's there and 50 times somebody's not, which means it's not a paranormal ability, it's just chance that somebody could be there or somebody not.
It's like that. Why do you have that urge to run up the stairs quicker and quicker and quicker?
Yeah. So what he did is he separated us into 50 pairs. One person sits on a chair in front of another person who is looking at the back of their head. And the person in back has a list of 20 instructions. At the first, number 1, look. Number 2, look at the back of the person's head. Number 3, don't look at the person's head. Kind of random, instructions. of to look or not look. And the person in the front at each interval has to say yes or no. Is somebody looking at the back of my head? And we kind of did that, and then you switch places and do it again. And there are 50 groups doing this. And then he collected all the results and found that people were getting about 70% correct in their judgments, which goes far above chance. And he said this is kind of a crude version of the experiment. He says you can actually do it in such a way that you're completely separated in a soundproof booth, from the other person. You can set it up scientifically so that there's no way of signaling or anything like that. So I thought that was an amazing thing, a very simple thing, but it shows something in an empirical way.
Yeah, it's not quite, I think some people might think of remote viewing and then the ancient term also of second sight. And I don't know if there really should be, or do you think there even is a distinction as far as, is it all just descriptions of abilities that, again, tie into this? Is it just one ability? Is it just something that we're getting these, we're banging on the control board and it's lighting up, so we know there's a reaction. So we're connecting to these ancient genetic technologies that we either programmed ourselves or are natural. You can call it natural ability, or maybe it's something that we programmed ourselves to be able to do, and all the ancillary tech is not there anymore. Whether it's engineered soil, the cymatic polygonal megalithic buildings, like how it all connected together with plants and animals, it really could just be one giant system that we have just disconnected threads left of.
That is a possibility.
I don't know, as far as like when you have second sight, or if you have, and I guess the distinction being is, being somewhere and being able to see someplace else that you're not actually at. Is it when you're in proximity of someone? Is it more than remote viewing? In the concept of remote viewing, is it that, 70%, you said 70%, right?
Yeah.
That's an incredible amount of not chance. That's not 50-50. That is just not flipping a coin.
Yeah, that was the point. Yeah, as far as, if you really get into this, then and want to carry out that type of research, then you do have to very carefully structure things and define everything, what you're trying to do, define all the terms. Like you say, what is remote viewing? And basically I would define it as the ability to see in some manner things at a distance that you normally, through the ordinary channels of your senses, you wouldn't be able to see or know. So, from the Vedic tradition of India, you get many people are familiar with the book Bhagavad Gita, which is actually a chapter from a larger work called the Mahabharata. But it's one of the most widely read books from the ancient wisdom tradition in India.
I'm throwing myself in there, Michael. I have read it. So, sorry,
okay.
Keep going.
So, Bhagavad Gita, if you look at it and see what it is, it's an account of a conversation on a battlefield that takes place between a man called Arjuna and his friend and teacher, Krishna. So how the conversation is heard is like this. Several miles from the battlefield, a king named Dhritarashtra, who is blind, is asking his secretary, whose name is Sanjaya, what are they doing on the battlefield? And this secretary of this blind king he has a power that's called in Sanskrit Durdarshana, the ability to see and hear what's happening at a distant place. So he begins to tell the king, well, I see Krishna and Arjuna, they're together, standing between the two armies who are getting ready to fight, and they're talking. And Arjuna is asking a question of Krishna, and Krishna tells him, yes, you should fight. Arjuna is saying, I don't feel like fighting. I don't feel like getting into this battle. But Krishna convinces him that it's your nature. You have to do it. So it's a whole conversation. They start talking about different philosophical topics. It's a whole conversation. And so that is an example from one of these ancient wisdom traditions of a remote viewing or hearing. So you've got that. Now, at this same conference, and it was in Montreal that I went to with Rupert Sheldrake, I mentioned Stephen Schwartz was there. And his type of remote viewing is based on this type of protocol. You have at one location a person called a sender. Another location, you have a person they call a receiver. The sender tries to send mental imagery to the receiver. Just concentrates on some aspect of the place where he or she is, and try to mentally project that to the receiver wherever he happens to be at some distance, big distance. And they found that they're actually able to do it. Like when the receiver is shown 4 pictures, one of which is the place where the sender actually is, and he's then has to pick which one was the sender sending him. He's written down what comes to his mind at the time the sender is performing his or her duty, and then he has to pick which of the 4 pictures it is. If it's just chance, the receiver should get it correct 25% of the time. But what they found is that the receivers are actually to pick up the correct image at a rate greatly exceeding 25% of the time, more like 37% of the time. So at this conference, Stefan Schwartz did a little workshop. There were about 100 of us there. He selected 2 or 3 people, told them to get in a car, drive anywhere within a 15-minute driving radius, go anywhere, and then mentally send back imagery to us in the hotel. And he gave them a camera and he said, videotape the place where you're at. So they went. And then for the next 15 minutes, we got some instruction from Stefan Schwartz. Just clear your minds. When it comes time, I just want you to write down the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't edit it. Don't think about it. Just whatever comes into your mind, just put it down. So I said, okay, I'll try this. So he said, okay. So 15 minutes passed. He says, okay, now start. Write it down, the first thing you see. So I was convinced somehow that these people had gone to a bowling alley. But I said, okay, that's what I think, but let me just do this exercise. So the first thing that came to my mind was a candle flame in a red glass holder, like a candle flame shining through a red glass holder. And then he said, okay, what do you see when you look forward? And I wrote down what I saw. What do you see when you look in back of you, to the right, to the left, when you look up? Just write it all down. All right, so I did all that. Rupert Sheldrake was sitting next to me. He did it all. And then after another 15 minutes, the people who had gone out, they come back and they take the videotape and they put it in the player. And the first image that comes up is candle flames in red glass holders. They'd gone to the cathedral in Montreal, the Roman Catholic cathedral, and where they have these little altars where people can light, a candle in a little red glass holder. So I believe in this stuff, but even for me, it was kind of amazing. It was just absolutely amazing. And my description was pretty much like that of a cathedral. So I think Rupert Sheldrake, he was next to me. He kind of got it mostly right. I got it practically 100% right. And so they went through what all the people in the workshop had down, and they figured as a whole group, they got it about 60 to 70%, correct, that they were in some place that resembled a cathedral.
It's so significant. It's so interesting because it's a physiological ability. It's not wishful thinking. It's connecting. It is windows into proof of human consciousness collectively. Did you ever smell anything? Did you ever, beyond sight, did you ever have any other senses, touch, smell, anything else that connected you in these practices?
I would say yes, but I'd have to think about it very carefully to document that sort of thing. And actually, I've participated in, this comes up at archaeology conferences, and even professional archaeologists, some of them are kind of into what they call the sensory aspect of archaeology. In other words, learning what people actually experienced phenomenologically in the past, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of years ago. And one thing they get into is like sonic archaeology. You find some pieces of stone in a cave that don't belong there, and they find like well, what are these stones doing here? They come from outside the cave. They shouldn't be here. And then somebody got the idea of, well, what happens if you whack it, with another stone or something? Makes a sound, like a musical sound. So many archaeologists think that some of the artifacts they find in caves were used to generate sounds that people listen to, like as music or as part of some ritual. So there's this whole, exploring this aspect of sensory archaeology. And they say one of the problems is that in the modern world, we kind of prioritize the visual sense.
Yeah. Yep.
So that is definitely a fact. Now, if you get into, there are taste sensations that I remember once this was in Russia. They have like we have in America, like horseradish. You know that taste, right?
Unfortunately, not a fan.
Okay. Now in Russia, they have this really intense horseradish that they make from a plant that's maybe 100 times more powerful than what we consider to be horseradish here. And I remember once they told me, "You sure you want to try this? It's pretty intense." I said, no, I'm here in Russia. You only live 2,000 times or whatever, because
right.
I believe in reincarnation. So they put like what looked to me like a quarter of a teaspoon or eighth of a teaspoon of this horseradish on a cracker or something, and gave it to me, and I took it, and it just exploded. It was just like my prana, my energies just burst out of my head. It was like really intense, like a kind of an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, definitely activating, definitely like a switch. It wasn't just like I'm eating some sort of interesting tasting food.
Yeah. No, it's like boom.
Yeah. Did you go for a second bite?
I think I did.
I can't do the hot. I like Thai food. I like hot food, but not so hot that all it's doing is removing layers of my mouth. And
you were asking for something that.
Oh no, yeah, for an activation. Yes.
Yeah, an activation of something. So that really, I don't think I've put any food substance in my mouth that ever did anything like that.
That's so. I do think we've, in the survival mode that we're in, I do think food itself it's the only thing. It's not like we're, again, if we were a really nice car, you put oil where the oil goes. You don't put it in the gas tank. You don't put gas in the radiator fluid. There's a certain amount of all the fluids and all the maintenance that requires you to maintain a very expensive or an average car. Yet with the human body, what your mitochondrial DNA expression is for the month or the day is based on your exercise. It's based on a lot of things. And people think, well, nutrients are building blocks and I'm going to get a better or more well-defined or more usable muscle. But it's never taken in context to this is what it's like when you have an electron exchange by just walking barefoot on the earth, mixed with a breathing, mixed with a sound, mixed with a taste, mixed with a smell, mixed with cold, mixed with hot, all of it together, along with either a projection or an internalization, or that if all things being connected in not just looking at food from the standpoint of enjoyment, but if it was all activation, not just for the sake of extended human consciousness, but I've always thought, in my opinion, that based on the research I've seen, that food is much more complex, and we've done it to survive for a few thousand years in this post, apocalyptic 12,600 year ago event. But the concept over millions of years of a more advanced human society, it seems to me that food, along with the way we connect to this total environment, is not a haphazard. It's more like a mistuned, missing a couple string instrument, more than anything.
Yeah, I mean that, in the Bhakti yoga tradition that I'm part of, that concept is definitely there. It maybe in a different sense than you're speaking about, but I think there's some overlap. It's the idea that, well, first of all, there's the concept of ahimsa, which means kind of nonviolence. And in that tradition, foods that are gotten in such a way that doesn't result in a lot of violence would be considered better. And also, the mentality of the person who prepares the food is considered. That if somebody is preparing a meal for someone out of love and affection, that energy is going to somehow or other influence the quality of it. So, those things are so then preparing food becomes more or less like a part of one's practice of yoga and meditation. So it becomes kind of integrated with the whole of the person, the whole of the environment. So that's to me, I see some parallels between that practice and kind of what you're talking about. It's not an exact parallel, but I think there's some overlap there.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a matter of just one methodology or another, or one practice or another, but part of what we seem to be tapping back into. I think one of your original points, or at least when we were talking about this last time and even now, about we're not just physical beings that live, eat, and die and need to consume because we're hungry. We've misassociated our physical hunger with our conscious hunger, and it's not a matter of fulfilling an emptiness. It's a matter of we don't feel right if we're not actually connected. It's kind of like hearing constant noise on the radio, and it's not a clear signal, or a scratchy picture on a television, which is rare because people have digital now, but it's the same thing. I think that when you're not eating and working out or meditating, it's not just all random, all of it to tune together for not just existential reasons, but for the actual hardcore physiological connections that we all have on a consciousness level is not a random idea. It's not theoretical. It's not a maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think it would be important. I'm wondering, what would it look like? I guess, do you think about it? What's the largest group of people you've been around that you feel have been on the same wavelength, that have been on that same level?
Well, I think everyone can be on the highest level. If I look in a certain way of any living thing, I mean, from my standpoint, each of them is a conscious individual self with its own identity and existence. And any particular bodily vehicle that it happens to occupy, it expresses more or less of that original entity. It's like if you have a light and you put a filter on it so that 5% of the light comes out and 95% doesn't. In other words, it's pretty dim. But it's not that the conscious self is dim, it's just that its coverings have kind of dimmed it. So I think everyone has the potential. It's there in every living thing, plant, animal, human, fish, bird, butterfly. It's there. It's the same kind of conscious self in every type of bodily vehicle. So with that, then I would say it's for everyone. Now, I could say, all right, and some people, they appear to be in a situation that they're allowing more of their potential showing itself, and some maybe haven't gotten that, aren't able to, in their current bodily vehicle, whatever it happens to be, not as much of that potency reveals itself. But every single living thing, as far as I can see, is equal, has the potency, the ability, the natural propensity to manifest their full capabilities. But
do you think it's all personal? Well, I know personal experimentation is, of course, part of it, but do you think that there's a general direction anyone should either start with, or in the idea that, I don't know, do you feel like you've hit, I don't know, maybe it's two different questions, maybe it's the same answer. What do you think about when you hit walls, or when you think you haven't developed any further? Do you feel like do you hit a point where you're just like, this is as far as I think we can take it in this form?
Then you go to the next level. And you'll find, I think that there's always, one can always know more, be more kind, be more, I think it's sort of endless, the degree to which one can perfect oneself or experience deeper and deeper realizations of oneself and connection with other conscious selves. And there's an infinite amount of time. I would say each conscious self, there's no beginning to it, there's no end to it. So
it's, and as far as a group goes, I probably misworded the question myself, but I mean, I think all the answers and what we've been talking about is incredibly important, I think, for anyone listening that's remotely interested in developing themselves personally. But one of the questions I had earlier, which I want to come back to, was, do you feel like there's a tipping point in the size of a group? I know we touched on the Sufi thing a little bit, but is there any number of people, if in a practice together in one focused meditation, do you feel like, I know sometimes there's these large groups that try to convene around the world at particular times, but do you think that there is, is it two, is it three, is there a point where there's a different experience for you if it's a meditation taken within a concentrated group activity, and is there a number to it?
I can't think of a specific number, but in the current age, people, I think, aren't really drawn to anything that's stereotyped or, narrow or sectarian. If one's identity is based on one's opposition to somebody who has a different identity, I don't think that works. I think people just have to see exemplars, you could say, people who walk their talk. And if there are, sometimes my guru would say if, just 2% of the world's people, were actually displaying these symptoms of understanding I'm a being of pure consciousness, you're a being of pure consciousness, we're all beings of pure consciousness. Let's satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, efficient, and fair and equitable way possible, while putting most of our human energy into developing that resource of consciousness, then we would see, major changes in the world. There are different ways things can go. It can be bottom up or top down. If you had one really good leader consciousness that inspired everyone connected with him or her, or him and her, and I know there's even more gender diversity. That would be enough to permeate the whole population of this planet. So, some people don't like top-down methods, even if, there's some really amazing person. And in that case, if it's going to be bottom up, then there have to be, I would say, groups of people who are able to attract the attention of other people who are looking for that type of community, that type of thing to be involved in. And another way to look at the whole thing is, it's first I have to myself become a being of pure consciousness. Then I can talk about my relationship with others.
Because part of it is a personal journey. Part of it in sharing, when do you lead, when do you follow, what does a guru, what does a guide or an expert or a leader in this fashion, how does that, when do you trigger that point where you can become or call yourself a master, or through that interdisciplinary approach of how you're applying it, and at some point there's some self-awareness that you can contribute to others in a way as a teacher, or maybe it's just a calling. I'm wondering how all of this, not trying to bring it back to archaeology, but I'm wondering, have you ever brought this exact approach to any of the archaeological sites that you've gone back and researched? Have you ever been able to look at it either through one of your gurus or masters formats? Have you ever brought anyone to one of the sites to kind of have that spiritual or conscious interdisciplinary look at an archaeological site?
Yes.
Wow. How'd that go?
Sometimes, there's some very specific cases, and they have to do with an aspect of archaeology in India. There are many topics connected with archaeology. One is, extreme human antiquity, which my book Forbidden Archaeology is about. Another involves what we could call decolonization or indigenous archaeologies. There's one group of scientists that I call the archaeology group, singular. That means they think there's only one archaeology. There's Western, scientific, reductionist. Archaeology, we have the truth, and we're not going to listen to anything else. Then there's another group, I call them the archaeologies group, and they're ready to accept, well, yes, Western, scientific, rational archaeology, objective archaeology is one thing, but there may be other archaeologies, a Native American Indian archaeology that takes into account the cultural practices and traditions of the tribes, their history that we're studying. And there may be an Australian Aboriginal archaeology, that takes into account their traditions and cultural understandings and so on. So I looked into the history of archaeology in India, and I noticed that the usual history goes like this. So in the 17th century, when European travelers came to India, they noticed some of the ancient temple ruins, and they started writing about them, and then gradually they formed the Archaeological Society of India under the British rule. And then when India became independent, then the archaeologists that were trained by the British took over the system and carried it on themselves as as part of Western objective scientific archaeology. But what I noticed is that there was in India itself an indigenous archaeological tradition that went back thousands of years in India. This typically involved some kind of saint who would have a dream, and in the dream, some form of God, some avatar would appear to him and say, if you go to this nearby hill by the river and you go to the top of the hill and you dig, you'll find an old Murti or deity form of me, made of marble or metal or stone. And the saint would get some villagers, they'd go to the place, they would excavate the form of that particular god or goddess, and then they would make a temple for it and say, this is, this deity was worshipped in ancient times, and now he's back. So we're, things like that. So I started making presentations about that at archaeology conferences. And then once I was in India and I visited this temple in South India at a place called Sri Rangam. And it's a huge temple complex. There's a central area where the main temple structures are, and it's surrounded by a wall. And then there's a second wall and a third wall and 7 walls all together in this temple complex and city. And according to tradition, there's a the third wall was constructed about 5,000 years ago. And at that time, most archaeologists think there wasn't any such culture in South India at that time where people were doing stuff like this. But, according to the traditional sources and the temple histories, that third wall was built, 5,000 years ago, which means the second wall, the first wall, and the temple complex at the center of the whole seven wall system was built before that, maybe much further back in time. So I was on a lecture tour, and I went to a university, and I met an archaeologist, as Indian man, archaeologist though, a professional archaeologist and professor at this university. So I told him about this case, and he said, "Oh, is that a fact?" I said, "Well, yeah, it's found. The information about it can be found in this ancient manuscript." So at his university, there were some scholars who knew this language that was spoken in that part of India. It's called Tamil. So they went into their collection of old manuscripts and they brought out the text I had mentioned, and they say, yeah, it does say here that the third wall of the Sri Rangam temple was built 5,000 years ago. So we went with another European archaeologist to Sri Rangam, the three of us. And we wanted to see if there was some place we could excavate near the third wall, where we could do some excavation. And we looked around. We saw a lot of it was very crowded, too many people, but there were some garden areas along one of the sides of this wall that were pretty deserted. So this Indian archaeologist, he agreed, well, yeah, we could do some excavation. We could take, and if we found artifacts near the wall that were of, at least 5,000 years old, that would help us date the wall when it was built. So he agreed to approach the temple trust that manages the temple, see if we could get permission to excavate there. And then he said then he'd have to go to the Archaeological Service of India, the ASI, and get permission from them. And then we'd be able to do an excavation there to date this temple complex. And so over the next few weeks, he got permission from the temple trust. But the government archaeological agency that controls all the digs in India wouldn't give permission, so we weren't actually able to do that. But I've stayed in touch with this archaeologist over the years. So yeah, we do have there are some examples of actually going to a site with an archaeologist to try to get some of these things. But the deity that's worshipped in the main temple is a reclining form of Vishnu that is carved from this black stone. it shows Vishnu lying in the causal ocean and generating universes that are created and destroyed. And this deity had been discovered, in the way that I mentioned, that over 10,000 years ago, there was a king living in this region that ruled this region, and he was traveling through a forest in a chariot, and he was tired, so he stopped and he took a nap. And when he was sleeping, the form of Vishnu appeared in his mind and said, "I'm here, I'm buried, and if you dig me up and make a temple for me." So he was told where this was, so he dug at that place, found the image, and put it in the temple complex that he started about 10,000 years ago. And most people don't think there was any civilization at that time. I think that's a topic that Graham Hancock and a lot of other people are interested in, this Younger Dryas era.
Yeah.
Do you think that this site is ever going to be excavated? I mean, a 5,000-year-old wall, and it only goes older from there. Yet they're willing to dig up Göbekli Tepe, at least 5% of it. But nobody, yet again, it's typical. Are we just chalking this up to archaeological conspiracy because we can't dig? Don't dig the past beyond X year.
Yeah, and I think in some countries there are political considerations as well. Especially when you have different ethnic groups that are in conflict with each other.
And on that note, I'm gonna bust in here, guys. That's it. We're out of time.
Oh, okay.
Michael, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, mcremo.com is my website. And actually, we have a special offer from the website. If somebody gets a copy of my latest book, My Science, My Religion, which is a collection of 24 papers that I've presented at major international mainstream conferences on archaeology about all of these topics we've been discussing, then they will also have the opportunity, if they purchase that book from my website, they will also have the opportunity to receive a free copy of Bhagavad Gita in English, translated into English. So if anyone would like to take advantage of that opportunity, I'd really appreciate it.
Awesome. And Jared, do you have one last thing to say? I'm going to ask you to stick around for the close.
Well, I just feel like the part 3 of this is going to have to get scheduled then.
We just scratched the surface.
Yeah, as usual, but at least I feel like we're a little bit further along if people listen to the last interview and this interview, and then, like you said, there's those prepared statements that, I've been a huge fan of your research, and it was a guiding light. Forbidden Archaeology is a seminal work. It is something that I think everybody should read if they are remotely interested in our past. The work you've done to do that book over 10 years is incredible, but that's not the only reason. The conversations we're having now about consciousness and these connections to our past and our future, I think in order to continue in series to have this conversation. And I hope it benefits us that people buy your latest work and Forbidden Archaeology and any of your other work, but also, yeah, I'd like them to buy my book. But I think that this dialogue, I have the same joy of being able to share things I've learned in research. But at the same time, I think these dives that we're taking right now are important for people who, whether they're new or even if they've been in on the subject for a while, I think we can give them some appetizer to get into their spiritual dinner.
Oh, really great.
All right, Michael, I will reach out and try to get a part 3 scheduled for us, probably either mid or late December into maybe early next year.
Okay, I think you know how to get in touch with Lori, who does my scheduling for me.
I sure do. And we'll be right back on Conflict Radio right after this. Well, welcome back to Conflict Radio. We've still got Jared with us. Jared, how are you today?
Great.
Well, how do you think it went?
Wasn't that great?
That was really interesting. I like how you just went on into the consciousness thing. That was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think it's a portion that exactly what we were talking about with Michael, maybe just post that last section, which was a lot of people who are either new or haven't heard me or Michael talk, or a lot of the people you get to, or we have, either you and I have interviewed or that you've done. I think that there's this layer to it where I think there's an expectation that, hey, here's an introduction to a new subject or a subject you're familiar with, and here's someone you want to hear. But this was just really exciting because this conversation was one that got to dig a little deeper, and it's a little bit of my personal experience. It's a little bit of Michael's personal experience. Well, it was a lot of Michael's personal experience, but not a lot in terms of the dive, but it's enough that if you have an interest in the consciousness side where you maybe didn't think, well, that has to do with our past, that has to do with our maybe a lost ancient high technology or just a general past. It's not just some mystical, religious experience. These are real abilities that we have that are part of our a broken chain of it always sounds like a reduction if you say technology consciousness, but these are real abilities, and we got to hear Michael's experiences. I'm trying to picture him sliding down the Arctic in a coat and thinking he's going to die and having an out-of-body experience. I did not think that would be part of our dialogue today.
Yeah, I really thought fascinating the food energy. How if you're cooking the food with love, like the other person that you're cooking it for can actually taste it. I thought that was
100%.
That was fascinating. I definitely want to try Russian horseradish now.
Oh God.
And I was trying to, as I'm listening to this interview take place, I'm trying to picture Michael Cremo in yoga pants, and it's just not.
Sitting there, just he already has that calm, sanguine voice, so. I'm trying to picture that achieving that transcendental plane and that the mantras and the different, the way you either breathe or you speak or you make sounds or you're hearing external sounds or internalizing or chanting together in a group. I think that would be a fun and surreal thing to take part in with Michael.
Yeah, and just so our listeners know, our next scheduled show is going to be, I believe, with your publisher.
Oh, Olaf Phillips. Yes, that's coming up, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. In fact, I haven't told him you're going to be part of the interview yet. I should probably send him a message and just let him know that I'm going to have you join us. And we also have Jennifer Deo coming up.
That's going to be fun. I think that's an archaeologist.
So we're going to have plenty to talk about over the next few weeks, and I just want to let everybody know that you can always find us on www.conflictradio.net. You can always find us on Apple iTunes. You can find us on YouTube. Just search for the Conflict Radio Network. And Jared, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? You have a website now, right?
Yeah, I do. It's www.notaliens.com. And that isn't mean that there's not aliens, but you can find me at notaliens.com. You can get a signed copy of my book there. Otherwise, if you don't want to pay for a signed copy, No problem. Go to Amazon and look for it there. And I am on YouTube at Not Aliens. So you can find me there on YouTube or at notaliens.com. And there's also an email address. Feel free to send a message if you'd like.
Yeah, and I think that we actually have enough interviews now. I think later on tonight while I'm uploading this show on YouTube, I'll go ahead and set up a playlist on the channel for all of the shows that you and I have both been a part of, to where not only am I being the host, but you're being the host as well. And I kind of like the idea today of just kind of letting you have your questions. That you had a ton of stuff to ask, and I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and sit this out, and I'll call it when it's time to call it, but I'll let you have your time, and I think that worked out really well. I hope you got everything I guess you needed to for now, and we'll get him on for part 3 pretty soon.
I think that's great. And I was wondering the whole time, because I know you let the thing go, and I was really wondering, what are you thinking? I did want to know what your thoughts were on this interview.
You want to know right now? Well,
you should say something about it, because
my thoughts were that you had a lot better questions for him than I had, I think, in my notebook. And it was fascinating. It was a fascinating discussion to sit there and listen to it. And to be honest, I think it was a great show. You did a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. And I just really I think that you get in that zone where you get people that are looking. I don't think it's a rare thing. I think more and more people are interested in these topics. And for me, it's been a passion and a center of focus of my research and my practice. And like you said, that conscious food thing, that goes into aeroponics. And I've talked about a little bit, but I think that all of it is for two people that do this kind of research. And Michael's been doing it much longer than I have. He's had such, I think, a profound impact for all of this field of research. That's just really exciting that you were able to orchestrate and set this whole thing up. And I really appreciate it. I hope everybody likes listening to it too.
Yeah, man, it was great. I've always told you that you have conversations where I wish I was a fly on the wall. While I was today, and it was really interesting. So let's just go ahead and wrap it up. Until next time, batten down the hatches and be safe.